What's happening, folks? Geologist Philip Prince looking out on the Kamchatka Peninsula in easternmost Russia. Just had an absolutely enormous monster of an earthquake, sort of in this area, 12 or 13 miles deep, a little over 20 kilometers deep. Uh, when you have an earthquake that is magnitude 8.8 in a part of the planet that looks like this, with this deep ocean trench, shallower water, maybe a few of these little islands poking out, maybe a big landmass right here up above that trench. If you see that magnitude 8.8, you're immediately thinking tsunami, which of course did occur here. It seems like that was a little bit less destructive than it could have been with a magnitude of this size in a place like that. And you have a pretty good suspicion this is what we call a megathrust earthquake that is associated with a specific type of plate boundary. This quake was so big that it actually altered the list of the 10 largest earthquakes ever recorded on Earth. It knocked one off the bottom, and we'll talk about that later in this video. But what's going on in a setting like this? Again, on planet Earth, when you see parts of the planet that look like this, and just due to the nature of the plates involved, ocean water is just about always going to be involved in a situation like this. This is a big earthquake creating part of the planet. If you zoom out on this view just a little bit, we don't have to take it too far, and of course Google Earth makes that pretty convenient here. Within the view we have here right now, we can see five of the 10 largest earthquakes ever recorded on the planet. Got Prince William Sound in Alaska over here, Rat Islands here in the Aleutians. I think that's generally in the right place. The 8.8 that we just had, believe it or not, it was a magnitude 9 earthquake in a very similar spot, just to the east of Kamchatka, there on sort of the same plate boundary system in 1952, and it produced a tremendously destructive and deadly tsunami. 2011, if I'm not mistaken, earthquake off of Sendai in Japan down there. That's the one that produced the exceptional tsunami that, among other things, destroyed the Fukushima nuclear facility. So within this sort of limited part of the planet's surface here, again, five of the 10 largest earthquakes ever recorded, very highest in the eights into the nines magnitude range, right? So what is it about this type of situation here where you've got this deep ocean trench, shallower ocean with a little bit of land above it that makes these absolutely incredible earthquakes? And when you draw the dot of where the earthquake occurred, why is it sometimes that you draw the dot over the ocean, right, where the earthquake's under the ocean bottom? Or in the case of Alaska up there, Prince William Sound, I think the actual geographic position above where the rupture occurred is actually on dry land up there. All of that takes you back to what is under the planet's surface here. You got to think about plate boundaries, and what we're going to draw here is sort of one of the most iconic relationships on planet Earth that if you study geology, you will see time and time and time again. So got to try to draw some halfway decent straight lines here because there's a sea level component involved here, right? So we're going to illustrate this kind of like we're looking at Kamchatka here, where we just had the big earthquake event. Okay, hold it together here. Having trouble with these straight lines today. All right. Okay, and we're gonna use some colors here to just to try to differentiate between the different parts of the planet here. Okay, so we've got in the gray there, that's the what we call the overriding plate, and that's the one that is capable of having, in this case, absolutely has enough thick crust made of the right type of rock to actually support dry land like you see there in the Kamchatka Peninsula, right? On the right there, The much darker plate, that's oceanic crust. It's going to be associated with part of the mantle underneath it. That makes the lithosphere. In this case, we'll just talk about the crust because that's where the really big distinction is present. And that oceanic crust is a different kind of rock. It's denser and it's sinking down underneath that overriding plate, right? So that's when you see that appearance there, that's actually illustrating that you've got this sinking process in action, right? Those two plates are sort of in contact right there, where where they can potentially, as you would see it, they can sort of like slip past each other if the frictional conditions allow it, and they don't always allow it. They can sort of lock together and allow stress to build up. All right, so we'll kind of finish out our illustration here, something like that. Color in some water. Okay, and we'll add a little bit of detail here to the ocean bottom to try to indicate where that really deep dark trench that you see on the Google Earth imagery is actually located. Right, so this is a deep part of the ocean because that sinking downward plate there is kind of pulling everything down with it. Okay, so finish our little sketch out here. Have some water on the back. I'm trying to illustrate kind of a peninsula type of thing here. Got to do the dark green mantle. The rocks of the mantle down there are different from the crustal rocks above it. If you see mantle rock at the surface, it's kind of a deep green color. Something I always do, people usually color that a brighter color because it's hot down there. And yeah, it's hot, but we're talking here about the different types of rock involved, right? So that's why I always color that way. And last but not least, I don't know, we need a little bit of topography of some sort up here on the land surface. In this case, it would probably be good to illustrate some volcanoes as well, but we aren't gonna take it that far. Okay, so there's your setup. The plates are they're sort of locked together right here. And eventually, when the stress between them overwhelms the frictional strength of that plate boundary, they're going to lose that connection with each other, and you're going to have this downward slippage, and this top one is going to sort of release and move like that, right? So the overall effect here, which is massively exaggerated here, just so you can see what it looks like, would give you something like this, where everything sort of springs, if you want to call it that, springs out of this locked up condition, and releases some of that stored stress energy. All right. So if you like pop pop up the ocean bottom like that, that's going to first and foremost mess with the water column above it, and that's going to give you the origin of your tsunami there. And also, again, this is incredibly exaggerated, just so you can visualize the change. You know, that's actually producing sort of rupture along the bottom of the ocean, and it's actually producing a physical change there on the Earth's surface. Now, how big is an earthquake when you hear that magnitude? And it's like, what does that actually mean? It's referring to, need a heavier brush color so we can actually see what we're looking at here. And make it a big red line here. That's referring to how much, like the length of the area that ruptures and slips, and that also kind of goes in that direction there, right? So the size of the earthquake, the magnitude of it, is how much energy is actually released when things overcome the friction there, and that slippage actually occurs. So if you have 8.8s and 9s, you're talking about slipping huge distances of of this plate boundary here at once. When geologists study areas like this, they're actually very interested in what the plate boundary looks like. Sometimes on the bottom of the ocean, you have these little things called seamounts that are kind of these little rough patches on the bottom of the ocean there. You can have varying amounts of sediment actually sitting on top of this plate down here. We'll see if we can fill that in right there. Because that sinking plate is actually going down under the overriding plate. If you've got rough patches sitting on top of it there, right, so you got the rough patches there. If you have way more sediment in one place than another, that is actually going to affect how those slippages that produce earthquakes can occur and over how large of a distance they can occur. So when geologists look at places like this, of course, the earthquake is actually happening. The initial rupture, the initial shock is way down deep in the earth, but there's value in knowing what the top of this subducting plate might have looked like because that can tell you about the potential for rupture length along along the boundary there, right? So this overall relationship of that sinking plate is what you're seeing here. So if you imagine kind of tilting that view up, looking down under it, that screams big earthquake and big tsunami potential just because of that upward movement, right? So where else would you find the rest of that top 10 earthquake list? Let's see, we'll move slowly here so as not to overwhelm the screen recorder. You got one that is from 1906. Call it the Esmeralda event. Somewhere up in that area there, Ecuador and Colombia boundary. But again, hey, what do you see? That dark oceanic trench got this landmass over it. Basically, what we just illustrated with the only difference being that first and foremost it's going to be facing the other direction. So imagine like a mirror image of what you're seeing here. And that gray overriding plate is even bigger and a little bit thicker there, right? Got a couple of them down along the boundary here along coastal Chile. Actually, the largest one ever recorded, 9.5, is in coastal Chile. Again, associated with the same type of subduction plate boundary, where got a sinking plate, as you'd see it here, it'd be a sinking plate like that, and you have this mega thrust slip that releases huge amounts of energy. And the rest of the list, there's only one now in the top 10 that is not a subduction zone megathrust earthquake, and that is from 1950, I believe, and it's right up in kind of this interesting corner of the Himalaya, where the Himalaya makes a big, crazy bend kind of around this corner of India that's pushing into it there. And this one, incidentally, is similar in terms of how it operates. Can probably fire this one up really fast because it's a little bit closer to something that I draw quite a lot of on this channel. What would the difference be? Let's get that yellow dot out of there. Okay. The difference here would be, and we can probably leave this one just as sort of lines. Got a big continental mountain range, goes flat right there. Need plenty of depth on this one. So, kind of a similar type of a thing here in the sense that you got one plate tucked down underneath another. I didn't do a good job with my thicknesses there. You go something like that. Let's see, we'll color them in. We'll use some slightly different colors there. Very good. Got a lot of sediment deposited down there at the front of the range. And at this point, just got to make yourself some more mountains, right? So if you were to look at the part of the Himalaya there that experienced this really crazy huge earthquake back in 1950, there's a big rugged sort of mountain front there where the high mountains stop pretty suddenly down at sort of a flat plain down below them. So there's our big high mountains. And in a very similar sense, you've got this idea of one plate pushing up and over one going down underneath it. They're both continental type plates here, and for that reason, it's dry land on both sides. But that same idea of them pushing together and locking until finally you kind of overwhelm that strength and produce this huge shock. That's all pretty much the same thing. The overriding plate here, if we didn't have this quite so exaggerated, it would have all this kind of really magnificent geologic complexity in it, where you'd see like, these layers like stacked on top of each other like this. If we were to try to color all these in, I don't know. We'll see if we can do that real fast. This is a an amazing spot on the Earth's surface, certainly to think about structure beyond just kind of the overall layout there. You can see something like what I'm trying to illustrate here, where the layers have been repeated and stacked on top of each other in these just like really magnificent ways. The interesting part of this, though, of course, is that the actual earthquake rupture is again going on down here, sort of on this boundary between everything that is kind of part of this overriding system that's moving like that relative to the sinking plate there. So there's actually a fair amount of commonality between all of these huge events. And again, the size of the earthquake comes down to just how much of that boundary has the potential to break loose and slip in a single event, right? So who got knocked off the top 10 list with this 8.8 event? There was a couple earthquakes in 2006 and 2007, I think. If I'm not mistaken, we're gonna try to get this one right. They were sort of down in this general area. Now, if you've been watching this video, you might already know where you are in the world. Looking at Indonesia here, Sumatra, Java. You got this kind of darker trench, shallower water with the land up above it. That's one of these subduction zone settings like we've been talking about. Hey, you can see the other ones in the background up there. Yes, this produced the 2004 event that produced the Indian Ocean tsunami, that if you were alive at that time, you have heard about ever since. Sort of I guess the biggest such event that's happened at least in recent history. Well, the '06 and '07 right here, that's actually that was a strike slip earthquake event where you didn't have the up and down motion. We'll just doodle up here in the corner of the remaining drawing here. So in the case of this '06 '07 business, you had a setup kind of like this, and pretty simple. You had movement in in this plane as opposed to an up and down type of motion, right? So you ended up with relative relative displacement there, but it's more of a side to side type of thing. And those were in the magnitude eights. Again, right in this area, also very close to this megathrust boundary, but just a different style of motion. And now that has dropped off the top 10 list after 8.8 here in Kamchatka. So, we don't, as I mentioned earlier, we don't think that much in the U.S. at least. And I mean, I've been around geology quite a bit for quite a while. For whatever reason, just a lot of Russian, I guess, former Soviet geology, all the way over to the Caucasus Mountains, which are one of the most incredible ranges on Earth. You just don't hear that much about it. But absolutely, this particular boundary, right through here, has cranked out magnitude 8 to magnitude 9 events pretty regularly for quite a while, and it will continue to do so. So what we just saw happen here is not, you wouldn't want to say necessarily unexpected, but it's in a part of the Earth that has repeatedly shown the ability to generate events like this. And if you have that kind of a shock in that location, you can send tsunami waves all the way out across the Pacific Basin there. So Hawaii, Western U.S., South America, whatever, they're all going to get warned, right? So interesting event. A lot of foreshocks leading up to this one. This part of Kamchatka had big earthquakes going on for weeks, I guess, prior to when this event actually occurred, right? So hope you found this video interesting and hope you check out the next one when it comes along.